supporting businesses and industries across the economy to adopt AI, while also supporting AI firms in scaling and remaining in the UK, are the two sides of the coin when it comes to using AI to drive economic growth. In our next session, our speakers will address current barriers and opportunities to doing this, empowering growth across all regions of the UK. Please join me in welcoming Sue Daley, Kanishka, Narayan, Rocio, Concha, Galguera, Josh Robson, and Peter Corpe to the stage.
So hi, everybody. Great to have you all here and great to be here. I'm Sue Daley. I'm the Director for Tech and Innovation at techUK. Wow, that light's very bright. And it's my absolute pleasure to be chairing this panel today on the industrialisation of AI. Particularly as techUK, we're a supporting partner of the AI Fringe and have been since the beginning, so it's great to be back again. Look, I've got a brilliant panel. We've got 50 minutes to cover quite a big topic, but really kind of the topic, or one of the topics of the day at the moment as well. So look, the AI Fringe is all about bringing us together to delve into some of the themes that we know this year are being discussed at the AI Action Summit in Paris. And having been on the ground for the last couple of days, I came back yesterday morning. Two things were really resonating with me and were really, really clear. Firstly, a real focus on realizing the opportunities of AI, and particularly the diffusion, the adoption, the implementation of AI across all sectors of the economy and society, of course, but particularly the private sector and industries, all types of industries, and also the public sector. And the second thing that really resonated with me, and I kept hearing time and time again, is that word action is really, really important. So being welcomed that it was the AI Action Summit, welcomed that action is needed, and then the conversation obviously is where and how action is needed. And focus on, of course, collective and collaborative action as well, and I'm sure that might come up in our discussion today. So look, we're looking at industrialization of AI. How can we help industries across the economy to adopt AI and support the AI industry to grow? And what factors do we need to think about in getting this right? Role of government initiatives, I think we're going to touch on the role of trust, public trust, the regional aspect here, and also what can we learn from other sectors such as the public sector in terms of how adoption and diffusion is already happening. And I'm sure a lot more with my wonderful panel. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, so their role, their organisations, where they come from. And then I'm going to leap in with some questions to help perhaps set the conversation. And then we're going to have some time for your questions as well. So get your thinking caps on, as my mother would say. But perhaps let's start with some introductions. Peter, can we perhaps start with you?
Oh, stitched up at the end. Excellent. Hello, everybody. My name's Pete Corpe. I work for a large American software company called Appian, largely irrelevant for today. I've been in the tech industry for about 30 years. About 20 years of that have been purely focused on the public sector. And I've seen a number of technological improvements and advances over the years come and go. AI is the current one, but I kind of remember, I don't know, anybody else in the room remember putting your telephone into a modem cover and getting So the grey hair is real. It absolutely is appropriate. What I bring to the party, in essence, is just experience and knowledge. I've seen us go through as a country, as a nation, as industries, through some of these challenges over the years. And the latest and greatest thing is one thing, but how do we take best advantage of that? And how do we set it up for success? Because AI in and of its own needs everything else around it to help it be successful. So hopefully that's what I'll bring to the panel today.
Thank you, Peter. And I think we're going to come on to that broader ecosystem as well, and how do we make perhaps all boats rise as the industrialization of AI continues at pace. But Josh, please, welcome, introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Josh Robson. I work for something called the Scale Up Institute. So we are a think tank looking at the data behind growth. So we look at the best practice around growth, how to sort of build more effective ecosystems at a regional and also national level, and also the overarching value of high growth businesses to the UK. And I think the thing that's really important to capture here is that high growth businesses are actually not all tech. A lot of them are in quite diverse sectors. The point that's critical about them is that when they start to hit a scale up phase, i.e. growing growing at 20% or more in either turnover or in employment, or indeed both, actually the challenges that they face are often more comparable, regardless of their sector, to other businesses growing at that rate. And one of the things that's really important when we look at it UK-wide is that practically this is a huge boon to the UK economy. We've got about sort of 5.5 million SMEs to the UK, generating 40.5 trillion to the UK economy overall. More than half of that, so about 55%, comes from just 34,000 companies, and those are the ones that are growing at that high rate. In terms of this conversation, the thing that's really critical is looking at these businesses in perhaps more traditional sectors, but the way that they adopt that AI, and what you then need around those companies, both help them adopt it more effectively, but also capture the spillover effects as they start to apply it and really sort of anchor that growth within regions around the UK.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll definitely get into that. Rocio, great to have you with us. Please introduce yourself.
So thank you for having me here. I'm Rocio Concha. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy and Chief Economist at Which. And Which is a consumer group, it's a charity. And in a nutshell, we are here to make sure the markets deliver good outcomes for consumers. And AI is going to shape many consumer markets. And we need to think about, on the demand side of the AI, how we make sure that we take the opportunity that actually will be key to achieve the economic impact that we are hoping to achieve in the UK. So I'm looking forward to talk about this later today.
Absolutely. And Kanishka.
Hi everyone, I'm Kanishka Narayan, Member of Parliament for the Vale, Glamorgan. I was a venture investor in AI companies by background, and I'm really passionate about making sure that the next wave of AI makes a difference for the country at large, both in terms of our prosperity, but also for the dignity of people in every part of the UK.
So, brilliant panel. I hope you'll agree. I'm going to start with you, if I may, in terms of perhaps setting the scene a little bit of the kind of where we are right now. I love to kind of look at, all right, where are we now in terms of then where do we get to where we think we need to get to and how do we do it?
Yeah.
So thinking about historical context, right? We think about AI as another industrial revolution. I don't know if that's 5.0, because we had 4.0, didn't we? Whether this is 4.0 on plus or 5. And we've been through industrial revolutions in the past as well, of course. And we've always led in the UK through innovation, adaptation, changing economies, changing industries. So what do you think we can draw on from history and the parallels as we kind of enter this industrialization of AI era? You know, it's moving out of the research and into commercialization and into industries itself. So what do you think we have to take from history or learn from where we've been to where we need to go?
So I love this question because I think in seeking the future, we don't rely enough on learning from history. Exactly as you say, Britain's had a remarkable role in previous industrial revolutions, and I think we can do so again. But some of the big lessons from my point of view are as follows. One, technological revolutions only make a difference in people's lives when they are adopted and when they're spread across the economy and across our day-to-day lives. So that's why a lot of the focus of the government has been on not just the context of frontier safety in AI, which is a really important question, increasingly so, but actually also on the question of AI adoption and diffusion. Yeah. We're looking at that through pilots. We're thinking about how we can move the needle on that question. You can see it in the history of the 1990s with general ICT and software, that there was a huge sense of excitement about it, a sense of hype about it, lots of venture investment into software in the United States in particular, and it showed up everywhere apart from in the productivity statistics. And so the big challenge economically that Solo highlighted then and is true now is, yes, let's try and be at the frontier of AI, but let's make sure that the full country benefits from it, and it's not just that we're the tip of the trajectory, but that the tail of it is moving very quickly as well. I think the second big lesson is that people are seeking a genuine sense of government playing an active role in making sure that each of us can take part in that revolution as well. That has also been the case historically in setting labor standards, setting wage context, setting the bargaining context in a way such that people are able to have flourishing lives, as the history of the Labour Party. And so to me, the exam question at stake is, how do we make sure that in a context where human intelligence is increasingly matched by artificial intelligence, that the things that truly make us human, the quality of our labor, is prized and deepened in the context of what happens. And that's, I think, the fundamental third thing, which is when you actually look at the empirical question of how you drive adoption, especially industrial adoption of AI, the empirical stuff we do have, especially in the United States, says three things really matter. One is the scale of firms. Josh is right, the firms that are growing the fastest and are actually the largest are at the tip of what drives adoption in an economy. Second is awareness, being able to understand what you might deploy is fundamental. But the third really critical bit is complements, which are largely to do with human capital, the quality of our management, the quality of our workforce at large. And so to me, the fundamental question when it comes to adoption is how across the whole value chain, whether it's people developing amazing frontier models, whether it's people, senior management making the investment decision to adopt it, or whether it's each of us in our day-to-day lives and then going into our work context, adopting it. To me, the fundamental contribution of Britain historically has always been in the quality of our talent and people. And so it's been quite interesting when I look at the United States and there's a president who says, our fundamental contribution is going to be drill, baby, drill. And then you get the French president saying our contribution is going to be plug, baby, plug. I think in the British context, it's not as glamorous, but skill, baby, skill.
No, and that even, it could be a panel in itself of how do you get that right? We don't perhaps have time to cover on that today, but it'd be interesting to see if it's a theme that comes up, but I know it's a theme that techUK is definitely focusing on. Just before I come to you, Josh, and wanted to talk about that kind of how do we support those companies then and what does that mean for the regions? But Kanishka, well, you mentioned government initiatives. We've seen quite a few of those coming out recently. So industrial strategy, we've obviously had Matt Clifford's AI Action Opportunities Plan. We've got a 10-year infrastructure strategy across government, review of tech adoption, all of which AI weaves into and is a fundamental part of, which is great to see. But we've got to make sure that all these initiatives are coordinated, right? And that's going to be really, really fundamental to make sure that we get the most, bang for our buck out of everything that's happening. How do we do that, or how important is that?
Well, I think it's critical. And, I started my career in the civil service, and the number one most frequently talked of problem in every roundtable was the lack of join up in government, whatever area of policy you work in. And so, because of course, it's critical both in government. But let me say what I think is the right way to try and crack that problem of coordination. And I think it's fundamentally about arming the best people with the judgment, the discretion, the right guardrails, but fundamentally the trust to be able to join things up, because often institutional silos can get in the way, but when the people in our public services across the board are entrusted with the right level of judgment and the right training and the right guardrails, I think they are able to join things up because our lived experience has joined up.
Yeah.
And so that means a couple of specific things. One, it means that when we're thinking about AI energy requirements, we have a council now led by both the Energy Secretary and the Technology Secretary, literally sitting together to try and figure out how do we plug the gap across the value chain to make sure that data centers are powered, which ultimately powers our real day-to-day usage of AI models. We have a industrial strategy board. Just throughout the day, we have had the minister in base has been talking to MPs about industrial strategy in their places to make sure that it's seen truly as a joined up thing in places. But the third thing I'll say, and a really practical plug, is there are now over 400 Labour MPs, each of whom in their particular patches want to make sure that they're doing everything to convene and join the conversation up. So in my patch, I'm trying to make sure that we have the right data center investors, operators, we have people from the national grid to try and make sure that they're just in the right room and can at least ease the conversation, and we have people who are ultimately the colleges, the people who are adopting it, to make sure that the skills is a fundamental part of the conversation. So it is, I think, easy to underestimate, but the power of just getting the right people together, entrusting them with the right judgment and discretion in clear guardrails of the vision that we've set out nationally, that's the way to, I think, do a lot more of the join up.
So move fast and join up, I'm taking from that. But Josh, coming to you, obviously we're talking about, how do we help those companies then that are growing? Scale Up Institute has identified regional gaps as well that we need to plug. But also, your thoughts on the government initiatives as well, and do you think they're giving us what we need to realise this opportunity?
So it's really good to follow you, Kanishka, because this really does plug into what you've just been saying. I think the first thing to think about in terms of the businesses overall, when they're growing really quickly, is thinking about their barriers and what they ultimately need to get to that next stage. These are often very ambitious businesses with really codified growth plans, but ultimately there's an assumption that the challenges they face are always cash-centric, and practically the number one barrier that high-growth businesses face in the UK, whether they're in AI or not, is actually market access. They're looking at customers, they're looking at exporting, they're looking at procurement within the UK, and then they're looking at talent. And they're looking at that because they want to identify the market access point, then they want the people to help them realize that opportunity, and then they look for the money.
Yeah.
And in looking for the money in that regard, they're looking at that money as an active way of achieving a goal. And that's really interesting, but it's very different to a business at perhaps a different growth stage. But when we then look at a regional level, what you're then thinking about is how you organise that ecosystem around them, and that actually has 3 practical points, and we've been doing research on this for nearly 10 years now, and this comes from some regression analysis we've done and ongoing sort of surveying of regional challenges. Ultimately, the talent point comes right back into that. You need regionally available high-quality talent.
Yeah.
That is one of the key drivers of scale-up growth at a regional level, and that's then followed actually by clusters and hubs, which is a physical location that draws those people together, acts as an anchor point for the individual businesses, and it also acts as a showcase of the investors. Then you have regionally available equity. And that's because ultimately those equity investors, particularly, it could be growth capital, could be venture debt, could be other types of financing as well, but practically they need to understand the challenges on the ground within the region, as well as the challenges that that business are facing if they're going to be comfortable investing. And often there's a disconnect because on a regional level, the investors are only comfortable with the big ticket badge of I'm investing in X. They're not necessarily comfortable, or they don't necessarily understand the reasons why they might look in the Northeast, why they might look in different areas of the UK that are perhaps less well trodden than the Golden Triangle. And I think practically speaking, that's about line of sight, it's about bringing people together, and it's about creating that kind of joined up assessment of what you ultimately need as a business to grow to the stage and realise your potential. But that then flows back into the government point. So if you're in the government's shoes, you've got a lot of initiatives, you've got a lot of ideas coming out, and you've got a lot of sector-driven or sector vertical-driven kind of perspectives that ultimately end up in initiatives. But as a business, you're seeing all of those things from your perspective, and all of the different departments, all the different people who are driving that kind of golden thread of progress don't necessarily join it up in a way that makes sense to the individual business. And that means that business doesn't necessarily find what it needs first time, it doesn't necessarily find the right solution, and it then goes elsewhere, it considers moving abroad, or it just decides not to grow in the same way that it perhaps was going to do because it hasn't found what it was looking for and it's actually not got very much time to do much else. So I think one of the big challenges around this is ultimately following that customer journey, thinking about that customer from the perspective of its needs to reach its growth potential, and then ultimately connecting that business into the broader economy so that we all get the benefits of those companies as they grow.
And do you think the government initiatives we have, as you were talking, I'm thinking AI growth zones should be a really key initiative to help with that? Do you think we have, in the plans that are outlined, what we need to make this happen?
I think all the ingredients are there.
Yeah.
I think the practical point is about aligning it so that everything's pulling in the same direction. Yeah. So it's all very well having an AI growth zone, but on the ground, what does that mean for a business? Yeah. If it's thinking about its growth journey, it's had perhaps an Innovate UK grant, it's kind of gone through a series of innovation processes. Is it being introduced into a sandbox environment where it can look at different sort of ways of regulatory innovation to help it get to that next stage? If it's then done that, is it being showcased in procurement opportunities? Is it being able to kind of access those? Not that it should automatically get the contract, but are the procurement frameworks being designed in a way that could practically fit with that business opportunity? Is it being put into an export trade sort of mission scenario on a regional level where it can ultimately go overseas and perhaps start to sell that overseas as well? And I think those things aren't automatically done at the moment because as a business, as a government, we don't necessarily think in that business sense. We don't follow the customer in the same way that somebody who's being account managed by a bank perhaps would be.
Rocio, I was going to come to you and actually talk about public trust and why that's important. But before we do that, this is a really interesting conversation around, because I think about industrial AI, okay, how do we support AI companies to grow, so the kind of supply side? But then also, we've got to make sure that we get the whole ecosystem right here, and it's the demand side as well, right? So I'd love your views and thoughts of what you've heard so far in terms of how are we getting the right, do we have what we need to get the ecosystem right in the UK and to get that really, really thriving? Because that's going to be key to economic growth and industrialisation and productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the action plan, the size of the prize is huge. It's about 400 billion by 2030. And just to put it in context, this is almost double the economic output of the financial services today.
Wow.
So the size of the prize is big.
And it's not that far away, right?
It's not far away. And there is, you mentioned there are a lot of documents. We now have the action plan. On all of that, Riley, is putting actions on the supply side. How we make sure all the issues that you have discussed, we have the right conditions in the UK for that supply side to develop. Well, I think there have not been enough thinking is on the demand side. And when you talk about public trust, which is very important, but also consider about consumer trust in that, because many of the applications of AI will be in consumer markets. Think about robot investment and how you make sure that you think of that on the demand side in a way that encourage people to engage with this in a meaningful way, because otherwise you can have a brilliant innovation, but if people don't trust it, and then you don't use it, therefore you're not going to get to the 400 billions on that. So I feel that there needs to be a little bit more thinking about how we take the demand with us and which conditions you create for that confidence and trust, and which is related to that point on trust.
So what do you think is missing? What do you think we
need? What is missing is thinking about how you develop trust in markets. So from the demand side, I will say that I will summarize it into three areas. One is transparency. So if you are going to use this and it's going to give me advice on things or do things for me, I really need to have an idea of how this tool products is making decisions. The second thing that I need is make sure that, for me to trust that, I need accountability. So it's very important that these products are being developed with the right ethical considerations, but also making sure that they are not have unfair practice, if that makes sense. So these products can be amazing in terms of reducing time, giving me more personalized service and products, but they also can be in the wrong hands, wrongly designed, quite powerful in misleading me, in use the personalization for personalized the harm. So how we make sure that these products are being developed in the right way. And the third thing is, if I'm using these products, how we make sure that if something goes wrong, I have a channel to make sure to solve that issue. And I think that you have, if you bear in mind these three areas, and we have the regulators before here. I know that these days it's not very fashionable to talk about regulation, but actually it's very important. You need to have the right regulation in place for innovations to thrive, because otherwise there will not be the confidence on the demand side of this market to engage, and therefore you will be constrained in the economic impact.
I'm interested in the other panelists' view on this. How do we get the market right for industrialization of AI? And does it feel like it's working effectively now, or is there anything that other panelists think that we need to kind of look at in terms of how do we get the market that's open, that's fair, that allows these innovations, allows companies to thrive and grow, and also to use AI? I don't know, Cassandra, if you...
Yeah, a couple of things on this. One, I think, often when we talk about the supply side or the demand side, or when we talk about the frontier of AI and the diffusion of AI, these are analytically helpful distinctions, but they often converge and blend. So let me tell you what I mean by that. We've talked about before, Sue, about the fact that when Sergey and Larry at Google wrote their PhDs at Stanford on PageRank as an algorithm for search, it was considered a very geeky frontier, a bit of technological progress. And within years, Google was the most diffused application for search online across consumer and businesses. Another example, we often talk about, as I say, supply and demand differently, but one of the biggest drivers of the uptake of different digital payment tools has been the fact that we have a supply side which is thriving and has developed tools which integrate with people's existing workflows and how people go about running a coffee shop, for example, in a way that makes their life easier. And so, yes, I totally totally agree that the demand side is really critical, and both transparency, accountability, and appropriate regulation are good drivers of that. But I think a fundamental driver, which is still an area for the UK to do much more on, is the development of a really rich, thriving supply side of tools being made by people at the application layer of AI, who then are incentivized to go out and sell it in industrial contexts across the country, and are able to go and sell it in particular kind of high value manufacturing contexts in a way that really moves the needle. Is really interesting, because I feel that some of that has started to happen in parts of London and Greater London, and in some of the core markets, Sheffield actually, for example. But one of the things that we still lack is a deep sense of dynamism in a lot of the markets outside of those urban centers. And so one answer to your question is, I think, a great sense of dynamism, by which I mean new companies being started and new innovations coming into our market and then being deployed because people are incentivized to go and sell them in the way that makes sense for the consumer and for the person adopting it. That's, I think, an area for much more to do.
Yeah, and how we find those and then scale them up, right? And it was great to see in the AI opportunities plan that, yes, we got to pilot, yes, we got to grow, but then we've got to scale these things as well. But Peter, I'd love to come to you, and you mentioned your grey hair and your years of experience, so I'd love to get your sense of perhaps where we are right now. Does it, I mean, I've been in tech I've also got grey hair, but many years, and does now feel different to you, or does it feel like it's felt in the past in terms of kind of transformational technologies and the opportunities of AI? But of course, I really wanted to ask you about your experience working within the public sector, because, and we're looking at public sector later in another panel, but I'm keen to know, when we're looking at adoption, we're looking at diffusion, we're looking at how we create that demand side, what could we learn from what you're already seeing in the public sector? Is there experience, is there stuff that we could learn from that experience that we can take to the wider ecosystem, to generate that demand? But your thoughts?
That's going to take me a while. Thank you. I think it's a fascinating time, and I think it's almost like the perfect timing. We've got so many enablers now that we didn't have decades ago. The internet is rife. We've all got mobile phones. I'm guessing at least most people in the room have got one, if not more. Probably got a laptop or a tablet. You've got something at home. We're online all the time. The environment in which we now live and work is much more thriving than it's ever been. As I think back in the day, that wasn't the case. So for us to have taken advantage of AI 10, 20 years ago, I don't think it would have been as easy as it would be now. I think some of the earlier points, I think there's two subtleties there around how any organization is successful as it grows, gets into that 20, 30% revenue year on year as it grows. I think that's a common challenge regardless of whether it's an AI-focused organization or not. And then I think AI just adds another layer on top of that. So it's absolutely at the spearhead of modern innovation, of doing some innovative things. And that's tough. That's really, really hard. And to your point, Josh, around is it revenue driven? In the early days, probably not. It's brand awareness, it's growth, it's applicability, it's how are my products or services adding value into somebody else? And if I think about particularly the journey that I've been on and that I'm seeing on all too frequent basis, it broadly at the moment is falling into three categories. And the first one, if I pick on AI particularly, I think to get the best use out of AI, you need to feed it with something that's useful. On its own, it isn't going to do a heck of a lot for you. You need to prompt it. It either needs data going in or graphics or content, whatever the case may be. So if you're out there proffering your wares of an AI tool that does A, B, and C, that's great, but you need something to feed into that. Where are you going to get that data from? And what state is that data in? Is it good? Is it clean? Is it dirty?
Yeah.
Is it duplicated? Do I need to have access to that? And some of the bigger, larger conglomerates will go, oh, hell no, am I giving you access to that? Because I want to charge you for it. So we need to disrupt those barriers. We need to change the environment in which it's successful. Once you've then got access to that data, the output as well is also useful. How are we going to use that? And the point I'm getting to is that AI is part of a process. It's part of a solution set, an end-to-end chain, if you will. On its own right, it'll be really handy and really useful, but if you're an AI company looking to punch into the market, you need to think about the bits before and after it. Because if you get those bits right, now we're talking about an overall outcome value, as opposed to, I can spot 3 cats on a picture quicker than anybody else can. Coming back to the data point, I don't know if anybody else in the room's come across this one. There was a really good example of how AI was used to spot medical issues on images. So they fed an AI engine stacks and stacks, thousands of images, and this thing had 100% accuracy at predicting a disease. And they couldn't work out why it was so good. And it turned out at the end, at the bottom right-hand corner, there was a little signature from a doctor or a physician that said, has issue. And the AI engine had spotted that rather than the actual image itself. So it's really easy to get that misleading thing kind of going on if you're not too careful. That part about it being in the process, if I look in my world around bed blocking, for example.
Bed rocking?
Bed blocking.
Blocking. I thought you said rocking. I was
Well,
like,
you could do.
I'm not sure where we're going here, Peter.
It's entirely down to your conversation. I'm not brave enough to take that one on. But bed blocking is a real problem for us as a country. And if we could get people out of the beds, we wouldn't need as many beds.
Yeah.
We'd get people into the system in the process. AI is really quite good at figuring out where those problems are going to occur. But the downstream problem then surfaces as a result, because we don't have the care in the community to be able to pick up the
Where do
pieces
those people go?
Right. So my point being is what I'm trying to raise here is that part of the process, AI is going to be really good at finding where we're really bad, or where those inefficiencies are. Where are the next bottlenecks going to be that are going to come up as a result of us figuring out what that, and are we ready to catch that? Have we got the funding? Have we got the investment? We've got the staff, we've got the people, we've got the knowledge to be able to catch that and go, right, I can fix that bit, now I need to do that. And maybe that's more AI, don't know.
So AI is the start of it, but you suspect it could then raise other questions and we need to be thinking about them now?
I think we should, yeah, because otherwise we're going to hit that roadblock of brilliant, stop.
Yeah.
And then where do we take that? Well, for us as a nation, for the economy, the productivity to grow, that's what we need to fix. We did a survey recently, and I'm really worried with a politician on the panel that I might be into an interesting area. We surveyed 1,000 civil servants recently, and we asked them how inefficient processes affect your week. And it was just because I happen to work in public sector. I could have picked any industry, frankly. And the overall outcome was roughly between 5 and 10 hours a week, I'm inefficient because the stuff that I'm working with just isn't joined up, isn't doing the thing it should be doing. I'm the human glue that kind of fixes the bit in the middle. And the expectation was that AI would solve some of that. 5 hours a week, scale that up over the civil service, that's 30 million hours a week. Run that over a year, you're into billions of hours.
Yeah.
So the ability for AI to make a difference, even if it's just a fraction of a percent, is massive. But how do we get to that point?
Yeah.
There's so much potential there. The difference it can make to us as an economy, huge.
Yeah, Josh, we were talking before about the spillover.
Yeah.
What could really be achieved if this happens? But then we need to be thinking about, as Peter said, okay, but does that open up more questions and more issues that we need to be perhaps thinking about sooner rather than later?
And I think that's a really important perspective to capture, because ultimately, the whole conversation around AI, if we make the UK really, really good at producing AI companies, that's fantastic. There's huge benefits there.
Yeah.
But there's a broader question, which is how do we make those AI companies spill over, lift the overarching economy in a way that won't automatically happen.
Yeah.
It might happen in some instances, but practically we can think about the connections, we can think about the way in which the product's being developed and the understanding that's being developed with those products flows into the broader economy. And that starts to come into things that we've already mentioned around talent and cash and the way in which these things work for individual businesses. Because one of the challenges we face in the UK is building critical mass of expertise and maintaining that. So as businesses grow, as they scale, as they bring in new members of staff and they give those staff the experience of being within a growing company, capturing that talent, maintaining that talent, and providing that talent with the opportunity to move into other companies is really, really, really important. And one of the things that comes out of the research we've looked at in terms of local ecosystems is, yes, it's about talent, yes, it's about hubs, yes, it's about growth capital, but then in successful clusters, it's about university engagement. It's about understanding how there's line of sight between the different players within the ecosystem so that ultimately the benefits are captured and people have the incentive to stay in those areas and genuinely build those businesses within whichever area of the UK they're currently in. And that doesn't automatically happen if your only focus is on building, the next billion-dollar company without understanding how that maintains its value as a UK billion-dollar company.
Yeah, so Rocio, what Peter and Josh are talking about there in terms of what's the prize here and the potential here and the spillover goes to that kind of the demand side again of how do we then help them, particularly in your world, the consumer-facing organisations to get on board with this and to think about what this, because and my members will probably not like me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that AI might not be for them, right? It might be another tool, but also AI could be transformative for their industries. So how do we help them realize this potential, this opportunity?
Yes, completely agree. And I have to say that we, as a consumer organization, actually using AI because have helped us with a lot of productivity. We have used it also to uncover harms and things that we couldn't do before. So, just to say that the potential is huge. But yes, I mean, the question is how we help. And I think that this is the issue that we were saying before about how we design products that not only with a B2B lens, but a B2C sense, that we think that are actually solving a problem, and we bring the demands with us to engage with that. So that, I don't think that there is enough thinking about this. And maybe there is not enough thinking about this because actually the supply side is a huge challenge at the moment, and building the conditions in the UK to create that it requires quite a lot of money, quite a lot of thinking, and to make sure that we capitalize on the opportunity for the UK. But you need to be thinking very quickly about that, how everyone is going to be using this, because I think that some way or another, AI, as it's already being used, will affect all the markets, and making sure that people have the right skills. And you talk about the specific skills, but actually I think that all of us have to engage with this and use it and know how to use it. It's not only the hardcore skills of data scientists and all this, but actually everyone need to know how to use it.
Josh?
And I think one of the points that we haven't talked about here, but well, you mentioned it, Peter, but I think is the way in which robust supply chains are constructed around it, and that's about something which government can actually play a role in, which is about acting as a procurement sort of anchor, but also understanding the way in which people who are supplying the overarching AI boom, if that's what happens, are actually drawing from UK companies, and that there is an enablement and a recognition of how to sort of build those supply chains in a way that ultimately supports the overarching economy, even if it's about busing people into the campus of whatever AI superpower we've built here. I think it's about understanding the right way to construct economies around an emerging sector. I think that's a really, really important point. And sometimes it's something which the UK has not done in quite as strong a way as some of our overseas competitors.
I think, sorry,
Peter, I was going to come
in on that. There's an organisation I used to work with, part military affiliated, DSTL, Defence Science Technology Laboratory. And they created a marketplace, and the premise of their existence was if the Ministry of Defence continues to buy in the way that it's always done, it's going to get the same answers. So if we always go to Boeing and we always go to BAE, and they're great, fantastic household brand names, but we're going to get the same answers. And what they were trying to do was disrupt positively the way in which the Ministry of Defence was procuring. And the belief was that there was a Trevor Bayliss out there in a garage and another Dyson and something like that. And how do we encourage, almost falsely so, those kind of environments? So what they did was they set up this marketplace, this kind of technology marketplace with an intent towards military, but not exclusively so, to bring together those small upstarts, disruptors coming along and partner those up with the larger organisations that could give them the understanding, the experience, the wherewithal, the skill set, that economy, and partner them together and go, we've got a need to, classic example, we need bendy bullets that go around corners, or special biscuits, or underwater basket weavers, or whatever it happens to be, right? If we've got that need, and I know that somebody over there does that bit, and somebody over there, then why don't I bit like an online marketplace dating app thing, and away you go. And I get where Josh is coming from, but I think probably as a nation we've become quite complacent and expect the government to do it all for us. Whereas actually I think we just do it ourselves if we really wanted to. We could get a couple of AI companies and we could get together and we could create that ecosystem, and you'd get something that's far greater than the sum of its parts. We don't necessarily need to wait for government for it. If they're going to support and back and help and nudge us in the right direction, awesome. But we don't have to wait for that.
Sorry, just to come back, I completely agree with you. I suppose my point is if we start to bring AI into the NHS, then that is a potential point where you can cascade the right best practice down through that value chain. But you're right, I mean, this is something which should be driven by the industry. It should be driven by people on the ground.
Well placed too.
Interesting. All right, we have a bit of time for any questions in the room. Does anybody have a question for our amazing panel? I'm just trying to...
Let's see.
Yeah, okay. I've got 2, 3 hands up, I think. Shall we go... Okay, where's the lady with it? Okay, shall we go to the, the black shirted person in the back? And then just stick your hands up if you had. And then, yeah, we'll come to, okay, we've got 3. We'll go with 3. Let's one at a time for now. So your question, please. So I'm doing this because the light is in my eyes. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Nick Evans from Deloitte. There was an earlier discussion in the panel around the fact that the right regulation is needed for smaller firms to have the confidence to innovate and thrive. And maybe based on the previous panel just before this, and more generally, is your view that the regulators are going in the right direction there? And if so, what could they potentially do more of?
Right. As we come to the person in the row down here, just pop your hand up with the white top on, the lady. Yep, I think that's where we're going next. Who'd like to answer that question? So, right regulation, right regulatory environment for smaller firms to grow. Josh, this might be one for you, actually, maybe. Are the regulators going in the right direction?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. I think there's a recognition through the growth duty and sort of other elements of the government sort of steers towards regulators of the value of growth within the UK economy. I think that the clarity that's needed is on consistency, so there's a consistent approach for businesses, but also making greater use of regulatory sandboxes and other environments where businesses that are perhaps on the cutting edge of innovation can sort of test ideas in a safe environment and then think, and this is partly for the regulators, it's partly for the government, it's partly for others, on how businesses that have been through that sandbox environment can then be empowered to go on to the next stage. And that could be through more of an account management process that's sort of introducing them to their next opportunity, or it could simply be thinking about the way in which the innovation that's taken place within the sandbox is then reflected either in the regulators themselves or indeed within broader procurement frameworks.
So the sandbox isn't the only thing, it's a means to an end, it's what happens after.
Exactly, I think it's a very powerful concept and it's something which is, you know, the UK FCA sandbox, we've endorsed that, it's something which is a hugely powerful kind of idea that's been replicated around the world. I think the important element is understanding the way in which that then reflects back into the institutions that it's helping.
And then what happens next?
Yeah.
I think that's a really critical point, which is about the regulator and the industry iterating and understanding how they can get better. But the only quick footnote I'll add to this is isn't a question about deregulating or kind of greater regulation. It's a question of different regulation in terms of how processes work within regulators. And one footnote on sandboxes is I think we've got to be honest about where they've worked well and where they haven't. The FCA experience as a long-term fintech investor, very good in lots of places, but actually in a number of places led to shortcomings for consumers as well. And so learning the right lesson is not an easy thing, but iteration is at the heart of it.
And I think to build on that just quickly, it's also about the alignment across different regulators. And certainly in the healthcare space, where sometimes there can be fairly simple frustrations that could be ironed out if there was just more of a joined-up approach. It comes back to the joined-up government point, where regulators are looking at what each other are doing and then recognising their own place within the journey of a business. Yeah,
and we had the DRCF panel on before, which is great, but we have to remember which is a great initiative and very, very much supported, but it's not just the DRCF, we have to get that wider community. Okay, I've got 2 questions left and 5 minutes left, so we're going to take both questions at the same time and then our panellists can respond too. So the person with the microphone, and then we're going to come to the person in the front row, and then we'll wrap up. So go ahead with your question.
Great, thank you. I'm Millie, Senior Policy Advisor from DCIT. So my question is also about regulation. So I was wondering, panelists' views on whether existing laws or regulations act as a barrier to the industrialization of AI in the UK, and how would they compare the UK's legislative framework to the one in the US or perhaps to the EU?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good interesting question. So is regulatory environment a barrier, and how does it compare to others around the world? And then your question, please.
Victoria Ivanova. I'm a strategist and researcher, and I'm just wondering on your position regarding the difference between frontier foundation models and application-specific models. And if we're sort of thinking about the next couple of years of industrialization of AI, whether a distinction really needs to be drawn between the types of data markets that we want to construct for frontier model development versus application-specific model development, which I think has been largely the focus of this discussion today. Thank you.
Yeah, two great questions. So who would like to kick off with answering that? Rocio, be interested in from which, from your work, are you looking at or where do you see that distinction between the large language models, frontier models, and the more specific, narrower models? Because we're seeing, obviously, that as a live debate and discussion right now. Is that what you're seeing as well in your work?
Definitely. And I think that there is a different, factor here, which is on the competition angle of things. These foundational models, we are seeing that being developed by a small group of companies are already very powerful. And I think that we need to think about what is the future that we want, because is these applications are horizontal applications going to every single market that will depend on these foundational models, when you really need to think about the level of competition that we get in that foundational model, because there will be tons of applications, but depending on what is being developed upstream. And this is where we need to think carefully about that ecosystem. And Europe have an opportunity here, and the whole discussion in the action plan and Europe about how we can develop our own AI, big AI foundational models is quite important on that. But we need to bear in mind, we don't want to depend on a small group of companies for something that will be transformational in a way.
Peter, is that large language models or smaller, narrow models a conversation you're seeing in the public sector as well?
Yeah, I think public sector is struggling with how to make best use of it. And it kind of crosses over into the regulation space as well, because clearly what public sector is working with, the data it's working with, in occasion is highly sensitive, highly valuable as well. If you think of us as a nation, to your point, Josh, around the NHS, that's pretty unusual. We've got a lot of content there that's certainly globally unusual. And I do like it. Interesting to see if anyone in the room. The government's now created its own internal AI tools. Did you catch the name of that this week? Humphrey, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. That will catch certain people in the audience.
For those of you that are fans of Yes Minister.
Exactly. So I think there's a whole thing in an area in and around that is yet to come out. But I very much agree with you. I'm personally quite concerned that we're going to end up going to the same companies for the same thing, and the monopolies will exist, and it will be again and again and again. We ideally can't afford to do that. We need a coral reef, if you will, of an ecosystem with lots of different things feeding on it, rather than one great big shark that's just hoovering up everything all the time.
So to the, Kanishka, maybe if I come to you, and Josh, did you want to come in?
I was just going to say quickly on the regulatory point, building a little bit on what I'd already said. I think sometimes in the sort of innovation space and in sort of overarching market space, regulation is automatically seen as bad, and it can be bad, but often it's actually potentially a bit of a pull factor. And I used to work in energy, and one of the big challenges in the energy space was everyone was always talking about sort of scrapping regulation. And practically speaking, a lot of businesses have innovated towards the regulation that exists, and they're looking at what that ultimately looks like over 5, 10, 15 years, because that's why they're building the thing that they're building. So I think in this instance, it's about understanding the value of regulatory flexibility, but also regulatory stability for people who are building things in line with what ultimately is going to be expected by the public marketplace.
Yeah, certainty and clarity is what we hear from businesses. But perhaps I give you the last word. I was going to ask everybody priorities for what needs to happen next, but maybe if I could ask you to close us off with, okay, we've talked about the potential, talked about the opportunity. What's the priority? Where should we, go baby go, right?
Yeah.
Where should we need to get moving on? And any reflections on the questions you had as well?
Yeah, let me try and wrap up a response to those two questions in that. So one, I think a strategic clarity from the government that we've got now, which is that we are shooting not just to be the country that drives the adoption of AI, but we are going to be hopefully a country which is also at the frontier. And so the ambition and the opportunities plan in terms of compute capacity, trajectory in terms of the initiatives around talent are aimed at not just being a country of application, but a country at the frontier, developing foundation models as well. And I think a lot of people have looked at DeepSeek for different lessons. One of the lessons I draw from it is a sense of possibility for Britain. The second thing on regulation, I think, is yes, there's some things that we're doing on regulatory innovation, and that will involve changes to specific regulation and clearly the institutional architecture in some places. But the fundamental thing when it comes to deployment on regulation is building a sense of clarity on what the existing regulation says and what it means for a particular instance. When you're deploying a model in your workplace and you may not be clear about the underlying explainability of that model and therefore your obligations under existing bits of regulation. That is not a question necessarily of changing the regulation, it's a question of clarifying what it means in the modern application context we're in. And the third priority for me across a clear sense of ambition on the frontier, regulatory clarity. The third priority for me fundamentally is, unlike the software innovation of the last decade, I think the AI revolution offers us a chance to connect different parts of the country up, to be able to build a data center in the Vale of Glamorgan, to be able to have a semiconductor cluster in Newport, to have an amazing research resource in AI in Bristol, to have fiber connecting all of that through to applications in firms and households across the M4 corridor through to London. And so that to me is the sense of the prize. Yes, a huge scale of it, but ultimately a great spread of it.
Yeah, great opportunity. Let's just, we need to work together to make this happen. And that's definitely something that techUK, we're committed to doing as well. Working with, obviously, consumer groups as well, but with scale-up community, with companies, with academia, with all of you. So this is only the start of this conversation, but I hope you found that a useful conversation. We're going to close it there. I think we're handing over to lunch now, right? Might be lunch. But before we all go and grab a sandwich, can we please thank our wonderful panels of Peter to Josh to us. Okay, turn the same way.